Well, as we have studied together in this Gospel of John, we have been confronted with the evidence of who Jesus is. You may be surprised by what you didn't know before. I've heard some people say maybe they didn't know that Jesus didn't just begin in a manger, or that what his role is to judge the living and the dead. Lots of different parts of who Jesus said that he was. One passage that stands out of all we have read and thought through is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. In the middle of Pilate's trial of Jesus, he throws out the unintended best evidence of who Jesus is. He says, what is truth? Given the above verse being accurate, if Jesus isn't all three of these, the way, the truth, and the life, then he is none of them. So I have titled this message, Jesus is Truth, Therefore the Way and the Life. So we're going to look at three parts today. We're going to look at it this way. Truth on trial, truth is power, and truth demands a verdict. So let's start with truth on trial. So last week we know that Jesus was brought before the high priest Caiaphas, and before that someone named Annas. This was part of the Jewish trial, if you will. Then they were forced to bring Jesus before the governor Pontius Pilate. It was illegal for them to meet at night for a trial, so they had to legitimize their trial by having a Roman trial, first thing in the morning. And they needed to do this because the Passover was coming. By the way, the Galileans celebrated the Passover on Thursday. The Jerusalem Jews did that on Friday. They were forced to bring Jesus before the governor, Pontius Pilate. And so they couldn't enter his house. Why? Well, you think that there's a rule somewhere in the law that says that you can't enter the house of a Jew. Actually, it's not true. It wasn't part of the 613 parts of the law. It was something that these very religious leaders had thought up. And there were some reasons for that I won't get into. They were selective, that's for sure, on which laws they would honor. Pilate asked them to state the charges. So since Jesus had broken no Roman law, they had to be vague. So guess what they said? Yeah, they said, he's done evil, which isn't a charge in a court of law. As many times as they tried, they could not pin an infraction of the Roman law on Jesus. Eventually, they brought several violations of their own Jewish law, including that he claimed to be the Son of God and that he was a king. Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. What was their response? It is not lawful for us to put him to death. That was obviously their only acceptable punishment in this case. It's all they would tolerate. If they were going to put him to death, how would they have done that? Well, we know because several times when he supposedly blasphemed, they would pick up stones, right, to stone him. That would be a taking down of a man, and it was the Jewish way of death. What was the Roman way of death? The Roman way of death was lifting somebody up on a cross. So Jesus had already told them how he would die. And of course, what he told them is that he would be lifted up like that snake in the wilderness on a pole. He also told them in John 12:32, he would be lifted up from the earth and draw all people to himself. How do we know he was talking about his death? Because after that verse, he said, this was to tell them the manner of death that he would endure. He was to be crucified. He had prophesied that. Do you realize how important that is? If he had been stoned, and they said, well, it's not lawful for us to kill somebody. Remember who they did stone? Yeah, Stephen. Not before this, after this, but obviously they could stone somebody, and they did stone somebody. And they were given permission here by Pilate to go ahead and do what they can do, what they would do. But this is an important part. If he was stoned, then he was wrong. And if he was wrong, he wasn't the Son of God. And if he's not the Son of God, then he is not the way, the truth, and the life, and your Christianity is in vain. He had to be all three, the way, the truth, and the life, always. If he was truth without ever lying or misspeaking, then it could be said that he was the way, the truth, and the life. The only thing they were finally able to pin on him actually was truth. He was a king. And he explained the kind of king that he was to Pilate, right? And he was the Son of God. Now, the religious leaders are actually the ones who had to lie in this trial to bring Jesus to their form of justice. And I want to read a passage out of this Christ-centered exposition commentary that's for the book of John. It was written by a number of people: Matt Carter, Josh Redberg, David Platt, David Aiken. Excellent stuff. But let me read this to you. Why do men and women need the gospel? Because the human heart is a pigsty. It's dirty and nasty, full of filth. It smells rotten. Mud and waste fill every corner. Religion looks at that pigsty and says, I can fix it. It gets some wood and it builds a nice shed and it places it right over the pigsty. It picks out beautiful colors to paint the shed, plants flowers around the outside, and places a hand-carved welcome sign over the door. It looks great at a glance, but when you open the door, the stench of pigs wallowing in their own filth leaks out. Religion only succeeds in changing the appearance, not the heart. Jesus takes a wrecking ball to the shed the religious leaders have built. He exposes their hearts, filthy and defiled. The gospel doesn't deal in cosmetics. It gets dirty. It takes a shovel to the heart's pigsty and starts digging out the muck of sin. It isn't pleasant at first because exposed sin is ugly, but the gospel expels sin and transforms the heart. We need our hearts changed. We don't need our morals reformed and our behavior modified. If we attempt to change through religion, that is, through what we do, church attendance, charitable giving, disciplined living, strict moralism, we may succeed in putting a fresh coat of paint on our outsides, but inside, our hearts will still be pigsties. The filthy stench of their hearts is exposed in their statement claiming Caesar as their only king. They're lying, outright, bald-faced lying. Earlier in chapter 8, they told Jesus they were enslaved to no one. They don't view Caesar as their king. They don't have a king. They're more honest than they intend. They have no king because they've rejected the rule of God and the reign of his Son. So after this conversation, Pilate says, "What is truth?" Truth is the cornerstone of Jesus' ministry. If Jesus' whole ministry, every word written with God-given and inspired perfect memories of each writer weren't true, then your faith is in vain. Then Jesus was just a good teacher with some crazy magic tricks. Jesus is truth. Therefore, he can be the way and the life. Now, number 2, truth is where the power lies, or truth is power. Pilate had to do something, so he decided to pair Jesus against a real insurrectionist, a notorious criminal, one of the rebels who had tried to create chaos and killed someone in the process. Pilate picked the worst of the bunch. Surely Jesus, who he'd already declared a verdict of not guilty, would be a better person for the Jews to want in their society. It is truly ironic that Barabbas had led a bloody rebellion. They were seeking the death penalty for Jesus because he might lead a rebellion. And even at that, not a bloody one. He had already proven that when Peter cut off the ear of the assistant to the high priest, and Jesus put it back on. It's also very ironic that the name Barabbas literally means son of the Father. Now, the real son of the Father, with capital letters, was sentenced to die in the place of Barabbas. Barabbas was also called a robber, which seems like a sort of minor resume item at this point. He was chosen to go free, and 2 other robbers, possibly part of the same group, were crucified, one on each side of Jesus. One of those would turn to Jesus, recognizing that he was innocent and that he was the way, the truth, and the life, with much less evidence than the crowd, the religious leaders, or Pilate had to chart their eternal destinies. Which of the 3 robbers here was truly free? Was it Barabbas? Doesn't seem like it, right? Because Jesus said to the one robber, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The last point here is that truth demands a verdict. Pilate had the idea that if we flog Jesus, surely that punishment will appease this growing and hateful crowd. It's hard to guess how many of those in the crowd were also in the Hosanna parade just days earlier. There are those who go with the flow. That is evident. When the praise starts, they join in, and when the criticism begins, they are right there as well. If a Hollywood superstar is part of the progressive movement, they are hailed as a leader and a hero, and revered by hundreds of thousands of new followers. If they become a genuine Christian, saying Jesus is the only way to God, their fall from grace is swift, unanimous, and permanent. One crowd reveres Jesus as the Messiah and King as he comes into Jerusalem. And, whipped by the religious leaders, the next crowd calls for Jesus' death because he claims to be Messiah and King. The beating and mocking as King of the Jews was endured by Jesus. We know he could have called legions of angels down from heaven. 72,000, it said earlier, 12 legions. The severe beating was just one of the 333 specific prophecies fulfilled in the last week of Jesus' life. By the way, most of those were written 400 to 600 years before this time with Jesus. Pilate believed he had the power here, but it was obvious that his power was far below Jesus' own control over the situation. He told Pilate he had no power that was not given to him from heaven. Even the crowd had more power than Pilate. Who rendered the verdict? It wasn't Pilate. It was the crowd. Crucify him. Crucify him. Pilate was given a choice of what to do with this king. We all have that choice. You are in the crowd saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Or you're in the crowd yelling, crucify him, crucify him. There is no middle ground. And your justification to say crucify him doesn't matter. Maybe you'll say he's too narrow-minded, or all religions are okay in some ways, or I'm not a bad person, or my church follows some human traditions that make me feel better, or I can do this myself, or a host of other excuses. But it still leaves you in the crowd of crucify him, crucify him. What is your verdict? Was Jesus a religious criminal, or was he the one who finally releases us from being slaves to the law, slaves to sin and death? Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. And in Revelation, I'll close with this. Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and he with me.